Awesome. Thank you, Lori. Well, I really appreciate everyone coming out here. This is an absolutely amazing building, and this is my first time here, and I'm actually, well, not my first time on this site, but my first time in this building, and I am blown away at how amazing this is. So really appreciate you organizing this. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Joy. My name is Jesse Alt-Winzig. I have been a board member of the Buffalo Niagara River Land Trust since 2022, so it's been about 3 years, 4 years. My role in my full-time job is an environmental engineer. I work for a company called C&S Companies. I do a lot of brownfield work. So we're currently on a brownfield site, whether you knew that or not. This site was remediated back in 2020, 2021. It was a 8-year-long process from what Joy went through in the past hour with the tour around this building. And, we're just so happy to be here and see this building become what it is. Thousands of tons of contaminated material came out of the site to clean it up to pristine track 1 unrestricted use cleanup status. So super clean site, super exciting, and this type of site is exactly what the Buffalo Niagara River Land Trust is striving to do. So our mission is to acquire waterfront lands through purchase, acquisition, and conservation easements, and a lot of the times, the most exciting lands are the brownfield ones, the ones that we can clean up and do things with. And that's exactly what happened on this project. So again, huge remediation. That's what we're looking for as a land trust right along public waterways to give people access to the waterfront. And this is a great example. We're super close to the water here, super crazy environmental history here, and super exciting that it's become what it is today. To introduce Joy now, Joy Kuebler. She is the founder, owner, CEO of Joy Kuebler Landscape Architect, also Play Studio, and we're honored that you have us here. And I just want to introduce Joy. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so as Jesse mentioned, I'm a landscape architect, and I've been part of this project from its inception. And we're going to walk through a lot as part of the presentation. And so let's see. Nope. There we go. Okay. All right. So a little bit of background. Enterprise Lumber and Silo here at North 211 Main Street. We were a brownfield site. We are now a carbon neutral professional hub anchored by 2 construction firms and engagement firms. Once a long-standing structure in North Tonawanda, sort of lumber history, kind of reimagined into a 21st century version of its historic self, weighing heavily on environmental practices and environmental facilities. Okay, so the building itself, the historic building, which looked kind of like this in the 1960s, but it actually dates back to about 1910, 1912. Sanborn maps let us find it, and then suddenly, not there, and then suddenly there. And so that gap in time that's there. The original company was also Enterprise Lumber and Silo Company. And they made silos, right? Like that, like you can buy your silo. Now, they did a lot of trim work. So they did a lot of mill after it was raw lumber to planed lumber, and then now we're going to make pretty things out of it. So they were the company that transformed it into mill work, into other interesting things. Now, they also had these silos, and they also had roof shingles as part of their product line. That was a newfangled thing, which was to dip those roof shingles in a material called creosote that then would make them flame retardant. So you could no longer had to worry about your building going up in flames because you would be encased in a caustic poisonous material. Okay, right. So shortly after, so Enterprise Lumber and Silo lasted only for about 5 to 6 years. They were bought out by Esco Lumber. Now, the Esco Lumber story is that a gentleman who worked for Enterprise Lumber and Silo applied and put a lottery ticket into the Irish sweepstakes. So he was living here, but still had family in Ireland, put his name into the Irish sweepstakes, which is essentially the lotto, and he won. He won the lottery. And he won equivalent to about $8 million in today's dollar value, right? So imagine $8 million at the turn of the century. he came to work and said, I'm buying out the company. Thank you very much. You all now work for me. So he turned it into Esco Lumber. And so even as you're looking at this building, right, the structure that we purchased stopped here. All of these buildings did not exist. So this photo came to me courtesy of the granddaughter of the Esco family, and she does not live in the area. Her mother does not live in the area, but they come back in the summer times to visit family, and they drove by and they saw that what we were doing, and they could see the facade kind of being reconstructed to be very similar to that facade. So they hand wrote me a letter saying who they were and included this photo as well as one of her grandfather's last remaining business cards to say how thankful that they were that we were doing something so meaningful to them. She said her first job was pushing the broom to sweep up sawdust on the floor of this facility. So that's kind of where we came from. It operated through the 1970s as Esco Lumber, and they retired, sold it to another owner who just filled it with various businesses. So there was an automotive shop at one point in here, which added to the petroleum load of our Brownfield cleanup. And then as the building started to deteriorate more and more, it was mostly used for storage. People would store their snow plows in here for rent. And when we came in, there was like a broken boat and like an old pool liner and a hydroponics facility and a rave room on the second floor. So all sorts of very interesting things when we came in. We purchased the building in 2016, and which gets us to here. So this is what it looked like in 2016, and if any of you came by and saw the photo on the wall over here. So it's a kind of an eyesore, but it was like, it's so cool. It's so cool. It had these really amazing bones. So you can see the facade elevation here, and we had a big garage door, and then an occupiable second floor mezzanine with a clear story that was 30 feet in the air. So our clear story today is 10 feet shorter. We shrunk the building by 10 feet in order to be able to afford this all. But the front facade integrity, so now if you turn around and you'll see out through that beautiful glass doors and windows that lead outside. Thank you. Now replaces our old garage door into something that's much more beautiful and unique. So at the time, so KCB, sorry, I put that wrong there. So Kelly Culp Burton Architecture. Kelly was working from a home office and needed space. I was working from my home office and needed space. But to both of us, integrity mattered and authenticity mattered. We are both from this area. We're very partial to authentic architecture. Kelly prides herself on historic restoration and net zero construction. And of course, as a landscape architect, it's all about the land and sustainability for me. So those things, the environment and authenticity and integrity were something that was really important to us. Now, our first collaboration, we've overlapped for many, many years in the professional world. We've worked at similar firms, we've collaborated on projects as teams together, but had not necessarily decided that we should start a business together nor work in the same space, but necessity is the mother of invention. We had both been independently looking at space at the Wurlitzer complex over on the Niagara Falls Boulevard, and kind of said, why duplicate things? Why have two copiers? Why have two kitchenettes? Why have two servers? We should just collaborate. So we worked with the Wurlitzer people for about 9 months, and we're not able to actually close the deal. So we both went our separate ways, looking for other places, and then only by chance did we, again, both find interest in this building and pursue considerations for it. First independently, and then Lumber City Development said, hey, are you two working together again? Because you're both calling about the same building. So then we said, all right, the universe is suggesting that we work together, so let's go ahead and do that. So we reached out to Lumber City, and then we began to inquire about this project. At the same time, right, so even a little prior to this, the city of North Tonawanda had just completed their final nomination study for a BOA, a Brownfield Opportunity Area Study, that they named Momentum. Now, of course, you see N and T, right? Momentum in the name, right? Very, very catchy. And so in that nomination study, this entire area around Oliver Street is part of that Brownfield opportunity area. Now, when I say that, what that means is that the state had found that was more efficiency and could make greater impact if they actually looked at groups of brownfield sites rather than independent sites. So they could leverage interest, awareness, study, and investment if they consolidated that. So this district right in here was part of the North Tonawanda BOA, and we were at this particular important location for them. Now, our site here sits right about here in this map. So this is Thompson Street, this is Island Street, and the Riviera Theater is down here. This across the street is 4 acres, which is directly over there, which had been dreaming of becoming the northern gateway to North Tonawanda. Now, when this was industrial mills and woodworking, all of this end would have been like sawdust and stacks of lumber. The entire Tonawanda Island, right over the bridge there, would essentially have been like Lenco lumber all day, every day, with horse-drawn carriages pulling up to take it from the stack and onto the cart, and then onto a barge, and then onto New York City. So as a downtown, Webster Street was all about where it was at, right? Over here, you didn't go past this spot. This is where industry happened. And beyond that was farm fields, right? So downtown, city of North Tonawanda had a very small pocket. So this northern gateway is something that's a very contemporary idea as River Road has grown and expanded and our connection into the town of Wheatfield has expanded. We now had people coming southbound from Wheatfield and Niagara Falls into industrial yuck before they got to the very interesting downtown. So the city had a motivation to reimagine this from industry into something else. They wrote that into their BOA program, and lucky for us, that was right where we found this building. Okay. All right, now, right, I told you, right, it was not pretty. It had some challenges, but it also had some opportunities. So the building was condemned by the city at this point. It had a failing foundation, failing roof. The structure was completely insufficiently sized, and the exterior facade was crumbling. So Jesse, did we have that piece of speed tile? Yes, all right, thank you. So you can kind of see, like, we're getting pits and holes, right, in our walls. The walls are actually constructed of an extruded clay tile. Think of Play-Doh and the machine that you extrude to make spaghetti, right? And then that long clay tube is then cut and kiln dried, so it becomes very, very rigid enough to make a shed, which is essentially what this building was, right? It was a shed that lasted about 100 years, but significantly degrading by the time that we got here. So we thought, though, it was fantastic. On this rear side, you can kind of see where some of these railroad sidings, we have our former rail line was right here, very close to the building. And then all of these would have been doors that would have opened to allow materials to come in and to go out directly onto the rail line at the rear of the building. We also had a similar rail line right here in front, so that materials coming out of the front would have also been able to go onto the rail very quickly. So it was a beautiful historic building, right, in the eye of the beholder. And so we called SHPO out, and SHPO said, you guys are great, we love you, but there won't be anything left of this building when you have to reconstruct in order to meet current building code. So our ceiling roof joists were on like 36-inch centers, and we're showing it, right? So sagging, big holes. That speed tile, while rigid like Legos, does not have any capacity to hold itself from racking. And so in an earthquake, which of course in today's building code, we would have to be resistant to, our structure would have to resolve for earthquakes. And if we wanted to put new doors and windows into these, right, now we're getting into some serious reconstruction. We haven't talked about where we're going to put electric lighting, right? So SHPO said, you're going to have to take this building down and rebuild it. Why don't you go play in brownfield tax credits instead of historic tax credits? So that's what we did because we were in this BOA. Now, this BOA also extra incentivizes the developer to invest in brownfield areas. So we're reinvesting into communities that already exist that might even be challenged, right, economically, because this would have been right in the downtown, right? All of this industry, which is no longer operating, not on the tax rolls and making that land very cheap, is not putting money and resources back to the community. So by investing into that legacy community, we're putting money back into neighborhoods that have been around for a long time. Why else? Think about utilities. What kind of power would it have taken to run all of these wood shops and wood mills? Huge, huge amounts of power. It's all still here. That didn't go away. We have infrastructure. So when you think about developing green fields, right? So you go out into a wheat field and you're going to take an old farm field and turn it into a subdivision. There's no water, there's no sewer, there's no electric. All of that has to be brought there, right? Here, it's prevalent, right? We have so much of it. Please take it and use it because we have it already in place. So there's huge incentives to reuse that existing infrastructure, right? Okay, now, so it was already in a BOA. They also give you extra incentive for development when you're inside a BOA as opposed to a separate parcel that's still deemed to be contaminated. You can play in tax credits at like 40%, Jesse, I think it's 40%. And then if you're in BOA, it's about 45%, right? So you get extra in tax incentives to play when you're inside a designated brownfield area. Now, the last one I have on their opportunities is relationships matter. So this building at the time was owned by a high school friend of my sister-in-law. And he was on the fence about selling, but he had not really done anything with the building in 10 years. And he really didn't have the resources or the experience in order to move it forward. So it was his dad who had been at my first wedding as a guest and is the godfather of my first husband, said, you need to sell the building to them, Chris. Let's get this done, right? You need to get out of this development business because it doesn't suit you, but it does suit them. And let's go ahead and make sure that the building can go on to be something else. Now, they had been offered sizably more offer from a used car parking lot or used car lots to just level the building, pave it over, and put cars for sale, much like the corner lot over there. And the family really felt that that was not appropriate and that they knew that we had a vision to do something really great. And so they took a loss and sold it to us. And thence began our process back in 2016. Now, before we signed on the dotted line, we had an event here at the building, and you can kind of see how great and not great it was, right? And Bob, you were here, right? Bob Pecorino? Yeah. You were here, right? You were here for that event. Yes. And Mark Storch, you were also here for that event, right? Yes. And great. So we invited an entire cohort of people to come who we wanted them to poke holes in our idea, right? So we invited elected officials, we invited other developers, we invited people who did brownfield cleanup, we talked to other design professionals, and we said, here's what we're thinking of doing. Are we crazy? And everyone said, yes, of course you're crazy, but you should totally do this. So we saw this as an opportunity to create a unique opportunity to retain our lumber history, to create a 21st century sustainable building, shared space, teams and tenants. And yes, could we actually become the developers in our work rather than always working for the developers? So that was all the questions that we kind of asked ourselves. So this is right away what we came up with, right, was sort of, again, you'll see the two stories, right, in our large glass window here now with the second floor occupiable mezzanine, much like the historic building. And we had our L shape, the return of the L. This location in the building where we're standing in is actually about here now. But we had the envision of recreating the entire structure, in 18,000 square feet. Of course, you know, our eyes are much bigger than our stomachs at that point. and then sort of looking at it from an interior perspective. So now looking up, right, you get a real sense of how close we were able to keep to the original vision. The second floor mezzanine was very expensive to do. It would mean that the entire building would have to be fire suppression sprinkled, so we'd have to have sprinklers everywhere. We'd also have to have an elevator in order to get to the second floor in addition to stairs, and we would have to have additional toilet rooms. So it was exponentially adding to our costs, not just a little bit of extra money, but an entire building's worth of more money. And then our site as well, right? So we have, which again today remains pretty true, we have the south side parking lot, the north side parking lot, and you can see where our original L shape was intended to return, a patio out front and garden surround, and my wood plank pavers, which I did get. And so on the tour, remember in suite 3, and I asked you to look down at the floor, right? All right, so now look down at this floor. Okay, right? And everybody else is just looking at, okay, it's a wooden floor. Now, of course, in a lumber warehouse, we would have a wooden floor, right? Yes, right? And Suite 3 came along. They needed to move into there very quickly. We could not get the flooring contractor to come in. So that is actually vinyl, but you wouldn't notice, right? Did it look pretty? It looked pretty pretty. All right, don't tell anybody. Okay. And then out here on the patio, which is now buried under snow, you can't see it, but we have a wood embossed plank paver. So our wood story continues on the ground plane all the way through the entire building. All right, so Kelly and I were also very committed to students and hands-on learning. But back in the early 2000s, when we were all working for different organizations, as part of the American Institute of Architects local Buffalo chapter, we had this crazy idea of what if architects could actually go into the classroom and use architecture as a way to teach. So we had a number of years, I want to say maybe 6 or 7 years, at least, where AIA members would partner with Buffalo Public Schools. And Kelly and I were part of that ground floor initiative because we were crazy ladies like that. So when it came to our project, we said, okay, it was really important to us that we continue that hands-on learning for our local students. So here in North Tonawanda, we have the Architecture and Engineering Academy at the local high school. And so we invited our students out. We had a hard hat tour when it was like, don't go over there, you're gonna fall through the floor. And we had the students, we did an entire tour, and then they got lessons in documenting existing structures. So how do they translate what they measure from the tape measure onto a drawing that then someone is able to use as a document? So they got a really great hands-on learning experience. And so then we enter into the next 8 years of this project in the making. Okay, so this is what it looked like when we arrived. And this is even actually a little cleaner than the first times we were here. So this is the second floor mezzanine that we could look down upon. And this was that sliding door. So you guys remember on the tour, and I told you we were upstairs and we had this cool sliding door and we couldn't keep it. So this was that cool sliding door on the second floor. But here's the holes right through the floors, right? And don't go down that stair, it's bad. Right, so that's sort of how it looked when we arrived. And some more, right? There's our great big holes in the roof. More of those holes in the roof, right? And you can even kind of get a sense of the roof, the joists on the roof and the holes through the walls. And so I remember when we were back in Suite 3, and I said that was a hydroponic area, having all sorts of product creation. So that's what it looked like when we arrived, right? Very moldy and everything just kind of falling off of the walls. Okay. And then this is our exterior falling off. So all of this top area, these were all open and literally just kind of crumbling. Anytime that they, were trying to shore up, they would just kind of put on a veneer of some concrete masonry units to just kind of like a cake, when a cake falls off and you use the frosting to stick the cake back on the corner. Yeah, that's kind of what they were doing there. And so behind this wall is the rave room. So there was a rave room. So kids had been breaking in at night, and they painted all the walls dark so that they could have like black lights and stuff. And there was still like a drum kit and, you know, remnants of the band that were still hanging out there. And there was a Cartman Cartman from South Park slippers that were like hanging from the ceilings. And Cartman will show up again later, so I mentioned that now. Okay. And so here we said, okay, we're going to do this. We started off with some very basic funding. So then Lieutenant Governor Hochul came out and awarded us $250,000 as a Restore New York fund. And of course, we took the name of the historic company, the original company, Enterprise Lumber and Silo LLC. Just rolled off the tongue more eloquently than Esco Lumber. So we went with Enterprise. We were able, because we're in Niagara County, we're able to play in the Niagara County Brownfield revolving loan program. Brownfield cleanup pays its dividends in tax credits after the project is complete, which in our case took 8 years. So that's a long time to have to wait for that tax reimbursement. So in order to get going, Niagara County offers a revolving loan fund that offers a very, very low interest rate to start to be able to do the cleanup, which is usually the thing that stops development from happening, is that people don't have the upfront costs available. Banks are very apprehensive to lend for cleanup costs. So we were able to do this because we are in Niagara County. We entered into the Brownfield cleanup program, which is how Jesse got to participate. So C&S Company did all of our environmental testing, and then they oversaw all of the environmental cleanup. Then we also had funding through NYSERDA. So when we went from not going to have a historic building, we wanted to have a 21st century sustainable version of its historic structure. So we swung hard to sustainability and environment, which allowed us to do some terrific funding with NYSERDA. All of our geothermal system, our solar panels, our structural insulated panel, our LED lighting, and our green roof all come through NYSERDA funding. We also participated with National Grid, as I mentioned, right? National Grid is very incentivized to keep you using the infrastructure they have already built. So they gave us a sizable amount of brownfield cleanup program incentive as well. And then the last piece of the funding was part of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative project, which was able to kind of cap all of the on-site stormwater, parking areas, and the last of the green roof. Okay. All right, so we got into action. So confirming our foundations was an important part of this, right? So you can imagine, even though we're building a new building, the cost of foundations is significant. So those existing foundations held up a 20-story building of speed tile clay for almost 100 years. Very, very sturdy and sizable foundation. So it's in our best interest to reuse those. So we first, though, needed to confirm that they would actually perform the job, right? Before we make that big assumption, we needed to confirm our foundations. We also then had to do our internal hazardous material demolition. So we did have asbestos, and we had some mold and some other things that we had to handle internal to the demolition. Then we did our phase 1 demolition, which was like this, right? Like, just going to take everything out of this building. And remember, I mentioned that we wanted to save the heavy timber framing. That had been really something that if we can't save anything else on this structure, can we save the heavy timber frames that were holding up the building? So we said, yes, let's plan to do that. So then we had what we called a precision removal. So we had all of, where you see here, all of these ceiling joists. We had the historic ones, right? That you saw in all the pictures from the existing conditions. We were able to salvage about 40% of those. Now you say, those were full of mold, what? So we sent those to the lumber mill, and they planed down all 4 sides, took off all of the detritus on the edges of those, but left the character of where nails had been put in and rusted and things like that. So, which are mostly seen on the rear portions of the building. So we were able to salvage 40% of the material in the building to be reused. So that was the precision removals. Okay, some more demo, right? Just taking this thing down. Oh my gosh. So you can see the interior side now of that, of the clear story. And right, like, look at this, just barely standing up, right? And so this is what we remained for ourselves, right? So the heavy timber was intended to stay, and now we're starting to excavate the site. And then, as we had said on the tour, we thought we were clean, right? So we had excavated all of our deep areas. We actually found old foundations from parts of the buildings that had been demoed over the years, but those foundations had been remaining. So we found lots of those. And then the DEC, we had previously tested under the slab. We cored through the slab 2 times previously, clean, no problems. And just as we're about done, DEC says, let's test one more time underneath that slab. And of course, 3rd time was the charm. They found contamination underneath that. And so that necessitated us to take out the concrete floor, which we had not planned to do. Our initial plan, the original finished floor elevation was below the center elevation of the roadway. So all the water was rolling in here all of the time. So the plan had been to add the 18 inches of fill that we needed to make all of our doors and grates work. We needed 18 inches to be raised. So we had planned to just pour that on top, gravel on top of the existing floor, and then a new slab on top of that. No, now we had to excavate, take off more contaminant, pay for a new floor, and now we had nothing holding our heavy timber frames together. So we had to lose the romantic idea of keeping the heavy timber frames in place. But we were able to reuse those heavy timber frames in the creation of this facade. So if you didn't notice on your way in, it's like a 3-dimensional panel. So on your way out, take a better look. We planed down our timber framing into 3-inch panels, and then they computer generated CNC cut the 3-dimensional pattern. So the cladding of our cube is all of the original timber framing, been repurposed. Yes, okay. All right. So Cartman showed up again. He was not going, and he's like, no, I'm not leaving. I've been here very happy. So we found him that random day. Almost took Cartman home, but we did. And so just another examples of like all the kind of weird stuff that came out of the site. And excavating in and around, we left the majority of those foundations where it was reasonable to, where they were really going to be in the way because of the new grading plan to make the pavements work, then they had to come out. All right, so now parallel to all of this, Main Street right out here was essentially an industrial road, right? Truck route, you can see, right? So truck route, soft shoulder, one drain on this end and one drain way down there, and no other drains. This is right in front of our building, circa 2016, right? So that's what we looked like right out front here in 2016. No drains in this entire district. What the heck? Why? How could they do that? Well, remember, this was developed in the 1800s, but we are also on a section of glacial till. So when I say glacial till, do people know what that is? We have some nods. So glaciers would have come down, right, and gotten to a certain area right around in here, and then stopped, and then they melted. And any of the rock that they would have picked up from other areas melted and dropped with them. So we have right in this district highly draining soils because it's just gravel that came from the glacier melt. So not everywhere in North Tonawanda has this soil. Right here has this soil. If you go to where Webster Street is, does not have the soil. So we're really, really fortunate. Now, of course, when you're building up, 50 years of lumber processing, they didn't have drains, right? It's just draining on the ground, right? It's just draining. So this whole area had never been anything more than lumber industry. So draining through the ground was exactly the way that it was handled. So no drains in the road, no drains on the site. How are we going to do contemporary development? So parallel to this, I worked with the city of North Tonawanda to apply for a green infrastructure grant program project through the DEC with additional fundings from EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. So the city was awarded nearly $1 million, so $980 million to create the entire street to be green infrastructure. So it is not a typical stormwater put in drains with pipes that go to the wastewater treatment facility. All of any drains that you see on this street corridor actually go to gravel. It has an overflow pipe that's set very high in that gravel, so if it cannot drain out and it backs up to the pipe, then the pipe will convey that water out to the river. But only if it cannot drain through all of the gravel in this area, which is very, very rare that it wouldn't do that. So we were able to also use all of this, so planted new street trees on both sides of the street. They're planted in continuous structural soil. Structural soil is a mixture of rock, topsoil that's got a lot of clay in it, and hydrogel. And those things are mixed together, compacted, but the gaps between those rocks are like this big. So a lot of space for water and tree roots to grow. And when you link it continuously, the amount of stormwater volume that you can hold goes into like the hundreds of thousands of gallons of capacity. And we have ample room for tree roots, right? So both sides of the streets, green structural soils, tree planting, and we had pitched the original idea for 3 rain gardens. Well, at the time, it's all industry except for our property. So we said, we will be the rain garden. So if you look out the window across, you'll see a sign. And where that sign is our city infrastructure rain garden. So we agreed to be the rain garden on the street as a demonstration project because we knew we were going to be here. And then the street also got brand new curbs and sidewalks on both sides. So right now, no sidewalks on either side. And we had all these heavy wires that were on both sides of the street. So the project relocated all of the heavy wires to the opposite side and installed sidewalks, curbs, and historic lighting that matches the downtown, came all the way up to this district in that parallel project. All right, so some construction photos, right? So here's our aggregates. Here's our drain, our green infrastructure drain project. And now you see Main Street is completely torn up. This was 2020. Thank goodness for pandemics, right? Nobody was out here to bother the construction teams. They got to move so fast. So we also replaced a water line as part of this project. So the city was able to do a sizable infrastructure upgrade in order to make that BOA dream come true. Remember that first slide where we had talked about that parcel across the street, which is 4 acres, that we want this to be the northern gateway, right? But it was an industrial road. What investor is going to say, oh, I'm going too fast the other way. What investor is going to say, yes, give me $100 million investment with condominiums on that street? Oh, they're not, right? But on our new street, oh, yes, they will, right? Okay. And it's starting soon. It's happening across the street. I'll tell you about it. So to more construction photos, you can see our building there. So this is us boxing out where the green infrastructure will go, all of our backfill of our aggregate materials, lets everything drain. Our curbs are in. Now you say, there's a drain here, Joy. There is. This drain has no bottom on it, and it drains directly to that gravel area below. It has a pipe that's very high, so if water backs up, then it hits that drain, and then the drain goes to the overflow. And now here's our building over here, and you can see, oh, look, there's our rain garden happening here, right? And we even have our new beautiful light pole, and this pole will get moved. It's no longer there on that side. All right, and then here is our rain garden. It's first year installed, and the street trees on both sides, our beautiful sidewalk, which didn't exist before. Okay, so green infrastructure street project complete. Now we've excavated here on this site. Everything's been excavated. And okay, now there's often some rules that come from the DEC about how do you determine stormwater, right? Your stormwater runoff calculations. So Typically, the DEC says that if you are disturbing more than 1 acre of area, you have to comply with stormwater management. If you're less than an acre, you're small potatoes for them. They don't really care. We're only 1/4 of an acre. We did not need to comply. The DEC also says if you are a redevelopment project, like there's already lots of built up, you also don't need to comply. We were a redevelopment project. We did not need to comply. But we're really committed to green, right? So we say we are going to comply, even though there's no governing body. Because, right, we believe in it, but we are also on our glacial till subsoils. We knew drainage was not going to be a problem, right? So the Brownfield cleanup let us leverage the excavation costs. In typical development, if I have a site that's neatly compacted and I say I want to install green infrastructure, that means I have to excavate out sometimes perfectly good material, sometimes not, and I have to move it someplace else, and then I have to bring in the materials that will drain. That's a pretty high expense to do the excavation that's not typically required. So often it'll get kicked out of a project as being, that's a nice to have, but the extra cost for the excavation doesn't warrant it if you're wearing the developer hat. Well, remember, we are the developer. So we said, all right, it's important to us, and because we're doing brownfield cleanup, the excavation cost is required, right? It's being part of the cleanup process. I get the hole for free. Aha, right? Okay, so the majority of our site was around 2 foot of excavation kind of everywhere. And we had 2 hot spots that needed to go down about 5 feet of excavation. Now, here in Niagara County, and I think we would experience it in lots of areas of Western New York, any place that was around steel manufacturing. So we had hot spots, which meant that we had radioactive material on the site, and it's a thing you hear about a lot in Niagara County. Mostly, it's not radioactive material that's going to kill you or hurt you really in any kind of significant way, but it does have a half-life. And it's mostly because wherever we had steel industry, which for us also occurred on Tonawanda Island, they had a waste material called slag that was very, very rigid and very durable. So they could crush it into big chunks, much like rock, and they could fill it in any holes that were kind of getting loose. Right? Oh, we got a puddle over there. We keep getting a low spot. We got some ruts where the horse carts keep coming through. Just keep piling some more slag on top of that, right? The same way we would do with rock today, right? So the fact that we had these 2 hot spots really wasn't, it wasn't like an unexpected thing, but it did mean that the Brownfield cleanup program did not necessarily have a program on how to deal with radioactive material yet. So we were kind of a guinea pig in our hotspots have to go. What do we do with them? And how are we treating the material once it's left our site, right? So radioactive material, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, but does go into a container and goes to a facility that is rated to handle contaminated waste. Yes. Quite significant, right? So we had to take that material. I think we went to Ohio, right? We went to Ohio with that material. So we had 2 hot spots that we had to get rid of, which meant we had 5 foot deep holes for water, right? So I'm going, how much water I can put everywhere, right? So I had more capture volume than I could actually generate, right? So I have more capacity than I will ever fill in today's understanding of storms. Now, as a designer and a landscape architect, I'm often taking the position of we should be planning for higher storm volumes than we have today because we're seeing a higher trend in those flash storms, right? Now, also, we live in Western New York, and we have this thing called freeze-thaw action, right? So how many of you have had like, oh, my sidewalks heave and other things move around because of that freeze-thaw action? So over lots of years of building green infrastructure with enough aggregate for supporting the load of the vehicle and supporting the current understanding of volume, that was often in an 18-inch range. Now, we all know what happens here in Western New York in 18 inches. That's still going to move, right? So my freeze thaw is moving that 18 inches soil all around. So years before this project, I made the personal choice of designing that in Western New York, I would go down to frost level with all of my green infrastructure, so that that storage capacity for water is always bearing on ground that is not susceptible to the frost. Now, it means I'm adding additional volume of storage capacity, but great, who cares, right? But it also means that my spring, my soils are the same as I left them, not necessarily with others, right? They're all moving all over the place, and I'm like right where I left it. Okay? So I had more capture volume than I could possibly generate. But the city said, you know, hey, we just built this green infrastructure roadway. We should probably connect. You should have an overflow because, you know, you want to be a good neighbor and it's the right thing to do, even though we will never, ever overflow. But we have an overflow connection on the north and the south ends. And so this out in front was one of our 5-foot deep hotspots, 5 foot deep right outside the door. Now you can imagine that's where the horse is coming in constantly, right? So of course it makes sense. So we had, we knew we wanted rain garden to be here, and we knew we wanted a patio here. So we basically stacked, let's see if I have it right here. Yes, okay. So we can, and for those of you who don't recognize construction drawings, I apologize, but this is a view we've kind of cut through the cake. This wall represents the building face. This is our patio up at the top, and then this is our garden space. And this is the 5 foot deep of material. So in the lower 2.5, we use that gravel that you saw in the previous photo. The upper 2.5, we used a combination of sand and compost. So that's my mix. It's my mix, sand and compost. And then adjacent to it, where we knew we were having the patio, then we have our DEC fill and our 2.5 feet of aggregate. And then we have our patio paver on top of that. So our whole patio drains and holds a lot of water. And then our garden area, we got really good growing medium for the first 2.5 feet. And then the second 2.5 feet is just water access, right? So all of those deep-rooted plants in the rain garden go down there, and it's just like, oh, thank you. They're like at the perpetual fountain, right? The perpetual fountain. And then on our north side, sort of looking at our details of our overflow that captures from our parking edge, we have a clean out drain, and then that connects horizontal boring to the city's green infrastructure underneath the existing sidewalk. Okay, so that's what this kind of looks like in construction, right? So here's that first 2.5 feet of gravel. Then above that will be the growing medium. And then this is the gravel for the patio area. This is our south parking line, which is right out here. And that south edge collects all of the runoff from the parking lot and the 2 levels, so this roof and this roof. All of that water drains to drains and then is piped underground to that entire 100-foot length, 3 feet deep, 20 feet wide, right? Again, more water than I could possibly fill, but I already had the hole. Timing was, we were close, not quite perfect, but we were close. So now you see our growing medium going in, our foundations for our lighting, and our patio. This is our patio. So the patio is a paver system with a wide joint so that we pour through the patio. And again, it's a wood embossed. How many projects I have spec'd that on over 25 years, and you know how many I've gotten? Just my own. Just my own. Right? And then this is on that south edge of the parking area, which we did not put our binder course on. We wanted that section to actually be permeable asphalt. And permeable asphalt is readily available, but the volume that we wanted was so small that for them to clean the mixer, put in fresh materials for our amount of area, it was like buying gold, right? So instead of it being $8 a square foot, it was going to be something like $60 or $100 a square foot. So we said, okay, we won't do that. But rather than go to a permeable paver where we knew it was going to take so much traction and wheel movement on our very tiny parking lot, our original application to the city engineer, he required us to keep back 2 feet open from our property line edge because he was convinced that permeable pavers would fail, and he wasn't going to have us, like that work. And so he said, just keep the last 2 feet open. It'll be like an open trench drain, and all of your water will go to there. It will still fill up the entire volume, right? So we're not going to run out of volume. But instead of having the whole 20 foot by 100 feet permeable, we have 2 feet by 100 feet permeable. It essentially acts as a gutter or drain, but it fills into that whole void space. All right, so now we're building back our foundations, and I have no idea what the time is. I'm trying to go as fast as I can. So we reuse the existing foundations and piers. We raise the new floor. Our structural insulated panel system, which essentially looks like an ice cream sandwich. So a piece of plywood, thank you, plywood on the outsides, and then foam, high density foam on the inside, which raises our insulation value significantly. It also comes to the site looking like Legos, right? So all of our windows were pre-cut. So each panel would arrive as a panel. The window cut was already made, and we just stacked up the Lego pieces, right? And then stacked on the wall section, or this roof section. So it made window construction very, very easy. We also included, so we have a new heavy timber framing system, and then our steel joists and trusses, which allow us to meet all of those seismic numbers that we would not have been able to make previously. We have a geothermal and solar system and a green roof. So that's what's coming next. So here we're digging for our geothermal wells. And so we have 2 wells, each are 450 feet deep, which essentially raises or takes the temperature from the ground. And then our heating and cooling system only has to raise or cool from the baseline temperature, which for us is about 45 degrees. So in the summertime, we're only going from 45 to 68 in terms of our cooling. And in the winter, instead of going from 1 degree outside to 68, we're going only from 45 to 68, right? So the amount of energy it takes to heat or cool is significantly decreased. So here's our well drillers on site. And then the heavy timber framing has now arrived. So the previous timber not able to be salvaged, new timber replaces it, and it goes up like Lincoln logs, right? Okay, so here's now the structural insulated panels are starting to arrive. And here you can kind of see them, right? Here's the ice cream sandwich, if you will. And our window openings and door openings are already created. You can see the panels kind of going up onto the truss. And our exterior sheathing. So we actually have 2 layers of exterior wall with an air gap in between. So structural insulated panel is doing the bulk of the energy reducing wall and structure. Then we have an air gap. Then we have a second exterior wall with insulated that holds our masonry cladding, right? So that we don't ever want to have water interact with our foam. So we need to separate those 2, and the air gap in between actually gives us another layer of insulated protection. And any water that comes through the weep holes, it goes through the masonry, all goes down that exterior wall, and it doesn't interact with the foam wall. Okay, and so you just get the hint of our green roof, which is coming. Our rain garden out front has been installed. Our facade shape, reminiscent to our historic shape. Even these sort of barrel top on the edges, which is something that the Historic Preservation Board requested. And our exterior veneer, to get a jumbo veneer was very expensive. So to match the size of that block was going to be like very expensive. But we could match the color. So we worked very closely with John H. Black, the brick provider, to find the tonality that was as close to the original structure as we could. And then, of course, we have our big glass window instead of our horse and carriage garage. All right, so now it's green roof construction day. Yay! Okay, so we have 2 extensive roofs, which essentially means that they're 4 inches of gap space. And the structural insulated panel handles our insulation layer. So the roof membrane is on top, and we box in our 4-inch gap, and then we use a slip sheet, which basically protects, so we have insulation, then we have roof membrane, then we have protection sheet, then we have another protection sheet, and then we have soil, right, or green roof growing medium. So green roof growing medium is put down, and here where we are, we have very close relationships with DuPont, and DuPont, of course, makes Corian. Corian is a completely stable material, and of course, in their factories, they have a lot of waste material. So the green roof industry has been able to capture a lot of that waste material as the aggregate that goes in growing medium as an industrial waste reuse into green infrastructure implementation. That material can also be used in lieu of stone in ground-based green infrastructure as well. So we used it here on our roof, and here's us going up on the lift, and there's our little bitty baby plants. And so again, this entire project is a lot of experimenting. And as I mentioned on the tour, often we think about green roofs, we look at them in magazines, they're using succulents for the most part, which is a plant that's like it's in the cactus family. So it absorbs a lot of water into its plant structure when it comes into contact with moisture, right? So it kind of sucks up water, and then when ambient water is not available, it will actually use the water that it has stored in its plant structure. So it can sustain significantly longer than plants that are herbaceous material, things that have thin leaves and thin stems. They will evapotranspirate water very quickly. Succulents will hold on to that, right? Okay, so it sounds like a good thing. Up on a roof, we don't know when it's going to rain. Maybe it'll rain. Those plants will absorb that water. So in Western New York, we tend to use some succulents, and the green roof that I have on my existing office structure, which is about 18 years old now, has a mixture of succulents and ornamental grasses and perennials and bulbs. And it's very, very dense now and very, very lush, but it's had a long time to grow in. So this project, we said, we're thinking so much about our systems. Could we also experiment to do native plants on a green roof? Now, native to native here would have been forest. So small plants, understory plants, would have been in very organically rich material. They would have been shady. They would have been cool. Not at all like a roof. Not at all like a roof. So we looked instead to all variety of climate areas around New York State, and we looked to the Adirondacks and to Albany area, where we are exposed, wind, thin soils that have more sand and more rock, more gravel to them. What are the plants that are growing well in those ecosystems, and could we apply those to the roof situation here, right? So that was sort of the approach that we took, knowing that this was going to be a big experiment, right? Okay, so here's Thanksgiving Day. This is the day after Thanksgiving. And so we're up on the roof. My husband was hauling soil up there. Dave Lanfear was our contractor. And so we installed and planted our green roof over the Thanksgiving Day break. And then this is what it looked like this past spring. So you can see our tiny, tiny little plants now had 2 full seasons of growth on them. And I couldn't even tell you all the plants that are up there. Maybe Joe says, oh, I think that was that one, that one, that one. But I'm like, I wasn't in charge of the list. But so it's performing well. And we have had some mugwort. So this past spring, we had some mugwort, which is aggressive weed that we would call that a noxious weed. And so I was up early. This was probably last week of April, first week of May last year, and was able to pull out the mugwort before it kind of really got honed in. Then we monitored it over the summer, and we did not have any additional infestation. So we'll go back up again this spring, and if we can keep the mugwort at bay, I will be a happy girl. And okay, all right, so then we kind of finish off the interior building. So when we first arrived, that big view, right, we kind of called it a cathedral. And one of the things that Kelly and I were really committed to was that everybody got to experience this cathedral, that it wouldn't be just for big offices. So we wanted to keep this main center open. So we recreated this main center. The high clear story gave us that ongoing cathedral experience that we really wanted. And so then we needed a spot to have, like, where's the copy machine go, right? Where's all that, like, back of house things go? So that's actually inside the black cube. This was the construction going in, and then bathroom fixtures, and then our really cool lighting, and our planting plan for our garden. And of course, it evolved many times. So we built only the first part of the L, right? We couldn't afford the second part, but we left those foundations still underground. So if anybody comes along and says, hey, we really loved your philosophy, would you consider adding on an addition? We do have the foundations ready to go. So if you know anyone who might be interested, have them call us. And in the meantime, right, our parking area. So this is the area that's permeable underneath. This area up here is the other 5-foot hotspot that takes all of the roof that runs off from this top and that doesn't get caught in the green roof panels. And then the upper stories for these go to the rain garden. Now, our rain garden, if you look out there, is high. And most rain gardens, when you think about them, they're kind of like a dish. And they're intended that water flows to the lowest point and water stays in that low spot like a puddle that you happen to have put a garden. Now, our rain garden is high. How can that possibly be? Well, we had to deal with the elevations from the roadway to our front door and the city sidewalk. And if we were to put that low, you would step out the door and you'd be in like a 3-foot hole, right? So we said, okay, we can't do that. And instead, we used hard pipe down the endpoints from our gutters, and then perforated pipe that takes that water and winds it through the entire garden area. So our green roof is essentially, or our rain garden is watered from below. So all those heavy storms go into that, right at the edge of that gravel to soil mix, and the plants get fed water from below. They don't care. Their roots are below, right? So great, I'm getting water. Thank you very much. So I was not strict about natives outside of this rain garden, mostly because there's some plants that I just really like. I just really want. So I follow a appropriate everywhere. So right plant, right place, always appropriate, never invasive. So I did include things like crocosmia and Russian sage that are not natives, but not known to be overwhelmingly invasive. The bees love the Russian sage. We had some trouble getting some things, right? So you can imagine, as with plants, right? Sometimes they're all sold out and you have to find something else. So we did add beautyberries, Joe Pye weeds, and Husker's red penstemon to our overall planting mix. And I know you can't read any of that, I'm so sorry. And so this is what it looked like last fall. So we have a true 3-season planting in that our asters, so we have our latest blooming aster does not start blooming until October, which is really phenomenal in Western New York. So to have your garden still like, wow, just in full bloom in October is really fantastic. So right here along the sidewalk edge is one of our fall blooming asters. Here's our Husker's red penstemon that just always looks fantastic. And here's a really pretty night shot. And I think you can kind of see out now our these Cylon, or these light boxes. Okay, and we have been blessed and honored and recognized by the American Planning Association for implementation of carrying projects that go from the planning level, at that BOA level, to the downtown overlay, comprehensive plans, leveraging every different organization and agency inside the state for funding, and as an exemplary example of when planning meets design, green infrastructure, and livability kind of coming together.
Bravo!
Yeah.